Nothing crazy.
Right. Like having your crotch burst into flames.
Much like the real Leonardo DiCaprio, he also wants to mitigate the effects of global warming. But unlike the real Leonardo DiCaprio, he's solely referring to the burning sensation in his crotch, as opposed to climate change. Now that the Wayans written reboot of Scary Movie is set to make a huge box office impact this summer, and next April is set to finally give us a Spaceballs 2, it seems as if the spoof movie genre is finally primed for the big screen comeback it deserves, now that 13 long years have passed since the failed and foul reception of the fifth Scary Movie. Directed not by Keenan Ivory Wayans of the first two, or David Zucker of the next two, but by Malcolm D. Lee of Space Jam 2. That is until Dimension Films chief Harvey Weinstein would order some last-minute reshoots directed by an uncredited David Zucker. That would add relevant parodies of Mama and the Evil Dead remake to the sequel's already overstuffed list of targets ranging from Paranormal Activity to The Cabin in the Woods to Rise of the Planet of the Apes and Inception. Yes, truly my two favorite horror movies, but not bringing back Anna Faris or Regina Hall this time, and certainly not bringing back the laughs, in what feels more like a cheap Scary Movie ripoff than a licensed sequel, and perhaps the worst fifth entry of a horror comedy franchise since Leprechaun in the Hood, which is an insult to Leprechaun in the Hood. But since I gave you awfully good subscribers the chance to vote for me watching this crap for a video review, I only have myself to blame for having to suffer through the scariest Scary Movie of them all, because it sure as hell isn't the funniest. I'm Jesse Shade, and on behalf of the JoBlo YouTube network, let us load up our loaded weapons and naked guns before flying our airplanes into this hotshot episode of Awfully Good Movies. 25 years after the Wayans Brothers' hit horror spoof Scary Movie was followed up by an underwhelming sequel that got them frozen out of the franchise by the dreaded Weinstein brothers, we are finally getting the return of Marlon, Sean, and Keenan Ivory Wayans as writers, producers, and co-stars alongside reunited franchise favorites Anna Faris and Regina Hall to set up the likes of Sinners, Smile, The Substance, and of course the last few Scream sequels, in the sixth entry that lacks any numbers in its name, Scary Movie. And with this new entry hitting theaters right after last year's Naked Gun reboot and before next year's Spaceballs sequel, it's a great thing to see the spoof movie genre making a welcome comeback long after the films of Friedberg and Seltzer had seemingly killed that genre off for good. And after the Scary Movie series was seemingly killed off for good itself back in 2013, with the foul and Ferris-free fifth installment known as Scary Movie 5. After the Weinsteins failed to buy up the rights to Marlon Wayans' newest horror spoof, A Haunted House, simply so they could shelve that movie and rip off its jokes for another Wayans-free Scary Movie sequel, they would instead bring back airplane spoof master David Zucker of the third and fourth Scary Movies to write and produce a fifth one 7 years after the last entry, while the director's chair would now be filled by future Girls Trip and Space Jam 2 director Malcolm D. Lee. That is, until the Weinsteins would bring in an uncredited David Zucker to direct some reshoots only 3 months before Scary Movie 5 would end up being stabbed to death by the worst critical reviews and audience reception of the entire franchise, after which this franchise would be buried for over a decade in the same grave as President Leslie Nielsen, with Anna Faris confessing in a later interview with Andy Cohen that she enjoyed Scary Movie 5 just about as much as Sylvester Stallone loved Rocky 5.
I thought that everyone did an amazing job.
But being a lifelong fan of the spoof movie genre myself, for whom this was the only Scary Movie that I missed seeing in theaters, let us find out what's that with the entry that was the Scary Movie franchise's equivalent of Scream 7. After all, some of you JoBlo viewers know all about how I warmed up to the Exorcist spoof movie Repossessed after I tore that one a new asshole on my show nearly a decade ago. So perhaps the very same will end up happening with my opinions on Scary Movie 5.
I told you not to let anyone in!
Fuck this.
Or perhaps I will instead grow to deeply hate all you subscribers who voted for me to watch this garbage just as much as I already hate the people who made Scary Movie 5! Now it's time to roll some blunts with Shorty and get yourself high as well as drunk with another round of the awfully good drinking game. Take a shot or drink as we open with a found footage parody of Paranormal Activity featuring the first of our 4 returning actors from the last 2 sequels. Charlie Sheen, not as Tom Logan this time, but now playing the similarly named Charlie Sanders. Even though all these jokes about Charlie's several sexual conquests, his many run-ins with the law, and his cat being named Emilio,
Get out of here, Emilio.
are clearly referring to the real-life Charlie Sheen, who thanks to his drug relapse at the time that got him kicked out of 2.5 Men, got himself turned into an increasingly sad social media sensation.
It's like winning.
And speaking of increasingly sad, we've got Lindsay Lohan, playing herself as Charlie's latest sex tape subject, who was also at the time leaning more into the tabloid jokes about her own drug-fueled run-ins with the law, which she has thankfully put behind her nowadays, as well as, to some extent, Charlie Sheen. But the jokes they make about their hard-partying reputations feel ripped right out of a Jay Leno monologue. And this opening scene's big punchline about their sex tape being a beyond dated parody of the Benny Hill show, which can't even afford to use the actual Benny Hill theme, is simply baffling. Never have I ever wanted more to shut off a movie and go watch Hot Shots Part 2 again instead. Then the spirits toss Charlie around this bedroom before possessing Lindsay's body, and then tossing Charlie right into the movie's opening title, after which a title card tells us Charlie's body would party for days after his death, Lindsay Lohan would be arrested on the scene out of habit, and future Red Letter Media guest star Josh Robert Thompson was hired as our movie's Morgan Freeman sound-alike narrator.
The large reward offered for the rescue of Charlie's kids.
Josh braced himself for the worst.
Personally, though, I would have enlisted the narration services of one Rich Evans.
Charlie Sheen! He's got
Violent HIV positive.
Then we follow on a search through the woods for Charlie's missing 3 children, the unlikely and unfunny comedic duo of rappers Snoop Dogg and Mac Miller, as a pair of stoners looking to steal some nearby bud named Jamarcus and DeAndre, the latter for which this was the only acting role for Mac Miller before his fatal drug overdose in 2018. And what a loss that death was for the world of comedy, because Abbott and Costello doing Who's On First is nothing compared to these visibly high Jay and Silent Bob ripoffs doing their beloved Cabin in the Woods routine.
Reminds me of a horror movie I once saw. The one with the cabin in the woods.
Friday the 13th?
The one with the cabin in the woods.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre?
No.
Jesus Christ, when are Bradley Whitford and Richard Jenkins gonna throw in the towel on these two and have these Nimrods murdered off already? Then the two enter the cabin in the woods, only to find Charlie's dirt-covered and feral children having seemingly raised themselves for the past few months, in what begins a parody of future It directors Andy Muschietti's breakout horror flick Mama, that hit theaters in January 2013, the same month that Scary Movie 5 would conspicuously begin reshoots, right down to recreating Jessica Chastain's terrible Ashley Simpson wig from that movie on top of the head of this sequel's Anna Faris equivalent, Jodie Sanders, played by High School Musical graduate Ashley Tisdale, whose scientist husband is played by another returning actor from Scary Movie Past, also confusingly playing the brother to a Charlie Sheen character, Dan Sanders, played by Simon Rex, long before he would make a comeback in director Sean Baker's 2021 dramedy Red Rocket, and long before Ashley Tisdale would professionally change her name in 2025 to Ashley French, which I will be referring to her in this review just as much as I was earlier referring to Snoop by his preferred name of Snoop Lion. So much like in Mama, these feral orphan kids are handed over to their dead father's brother on behalf of Daryl Hammond from Scary Movie 3, now playing the kid's psychiatrist, who offers Jody and Dan a chance to raise their new kids in this suburban home for absolutely free, just as long as they allow hidden cameras to monitor their behavior for research purposes. Along with a live-in Mexican maid by the name of Maria, whose stereotypical jokes about sleeping with vacuum cleaners, hitting piñatas in her sleep, and cutting the heads off of chickens are no worse than any jokes told by your grandpa at the Thanksgiving dinner table. So while Jody tends to these kids with all the combined parenting skills of Joan Crawford and Michael Jackson, Dan is heading out to his day job at a primate research facility in yet another parody of the first Planet of the Apes reboot, where Andy Serkis as Caesar is now replaced by the most disturbing chimp costume I've seen on film since Matt LeBlanc's Ed, and Terry Crews playing Simon Rex's angry boss looks visibly depressed covering up those wonderful muscles of his with a cheap-looking suit.
These apes are just like you.
What? Shut up.
Yes, of course. I know what you're gonna say. If he's so smart, why is he in a cage?
You're in the cage.
Well, to paraphrase the words of Billy Corgan, I am now filled with rage at that shitty joke involving a cage. Then Jody tells her husband in bed that night about being raised into ballet by her famed dancer mother, played by Heather Locklear, who gave birth to Jody while in the middle of her career-defining performance of Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake.
Looks like Phil Donahue throwing up in a tuba.
While a terrible Medea impersonator is in the audience, loudly ripping off one of the best jokes from the first movie.
Sit me again. I double dog dare you hell.
That ain't no man!
So now Jody decides her chance to bond with her feral adopted daughters is to audition for a nearby performance of Swan Lake, in what serves as a parody of Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan, which Aronofsky sure as hell deserves these days for his recent embrace of shitty AI animation. And where, in addition to Heather Locklear filling out the Barbara Hershey role, the aging dancer role played by Winona Ryder is filled in this parody by another alumni of SNL and Scary Movie sequels, Molly Shannon.
We'll see how you like it once the swan comes down!
While the Mila Kunis role of the rival dancer is filled out by this sequel's Regina Hall equivalent, Kendra Brooks, played by Mad TV cast member Erica Ash, whose admittedly sexy stripper routine in this scene is kind of awkward to watch, having just read on Wikipedia this actress died from breast cancer just 2 years ago. So you hear that, ladies? Make sure you get those titties checked while still shaking them along with your ass.
Show me what you're working with.
But compared to how wonderful the chemistry was between Cindy and Brenda throughout those first 4 movies, these two ladies barely spend more than 5 minutes on screen with one another. And compared to how hilariously naive and wide-eyed Anna Faris was as Cindy Campbell, Ashley Tisdale looks just as bored and irritated as the audience does. So instead, we have to rely on a bunch of hackneyed physical shtick from her husband, Simon Rex, looking as if he's auditioning for a reboot of the Dick Van Dyke Show that's instead renamed the Dick Van Dyke Show.
My penis!
As well as the Scary Movie tradition of hitting people in the head whenever they can't think of a punchline. As well as some particularly unfunny cameos from not just Usher as a dancing janitor, but also comedian Cat Williams as the money-pilfering psychic whom she and Dan enlist to communicate with the ghost of Mama that these kids say is still haunting them, but instead swipes the couple's credit card clean before putting on a gas mask for an Insidious parody that feels more like a terrible impression of Dennis Hopper in Blue Velvet.
Shit, I couldn't breathe.
Wait a minute.
Ma'am, you got to get out of here. It's evil. Mama!
No, Cat, even worse. It's another 7th grade schoolboy ready to beat your ass on the playground. And don't even get me started on this dumbass scene of their possessed pool cleaner inviting its fellow pool cleaners over for a pool party, which feels more like one of those stupid Coca-Cola ads they show at the theater before the movie. Although I admittedly laughed at this shot of one of the pool cleaners filming this scared Mexican maid with a digital camera of its own. I have a feeling that pool cleaner goes by the name of Karen. Yet even with David Zucker writing these occasionally funny jokes, along with co-writer Pat Proft of the Naked Gun trilogy and the Star Wars Holiday Special, the lack of energy in the director's chair from either Zucker or Malcolm D. Lee makes this flick feel more like a funeral pyre for the empire of spoof movies that David once led alongside his brother Jerry Zucker and their Airplane co-director Jim Abrahams, where they do not even bother connecting these numerous movie parodies into a somewhat coherent storyline. Instead, Simon Rex is now just suddenly duking it out with their Hispanic maid out on their lawn, with their fight continuing over into his ape research facility that accidentally opens the cages and frees the apes inside out into the streets of California, where they proceed to go, pardon the pun, ape shit. Meanwhile, Jody is in the middle of her ballet rehearsals and decides that the way to find out about these kids' unseen mama is by attempting to hack into their dreams,
To perform an Inception. Will you drop that? That's my birth tuba.
thus setting up a parody of Inception 2 years after the memes from that movie stopped being funny, which involves a Leonardo DiCaprio lookalike by the name of Dom Kolb hooking himself, Jody, and one of her kids to his dream hacking machine that reveals Dom's own dreams about his dead Marion Cotillard parodying wife, inexplicably played by Kate Walsh from Grey's Anatomy, as well as Jody's own sexual fantasies after she read the then popular bestseller 50 Shades of Grey of being invited to the sex dungeon of Christian Grey himself.
They call me Christian Grey.
Even more inexplicably played by Jerry O'Connell, 2 years before Jamie Dornan would play the actual Christian Grey in the actual 50 Shades of Grey movie trilogy, whom Jody finds in the middle of an S&M session with a neck-braced Mike Tyson, who I hope is not here to show Christian Grey exactly what he meant by his infamous catchphrase, "I'll fuck you till you love me, bitch." But as for young Kathy, her dream is about the origin story of their undead mama after she had gone down in the basement of her cabin in the woods and read aloud the infamous words of the Book of the Dead from Evil Dead, which led to their mama being taken over by a deadite, which I'm pretty sure was just the plot of Evil Dead Rise. But before Jody can investigate that any further, Caesar the chimp comes over to their house, where Dan puts the injured chimp to work looking over their haunted kids, while Jody heads to a nightclub with her fellow dancer Kendra, and the two of them ingest some Molly before heading out on the dance floor, then getting into a Naked Gun-esque parody of the lesbian sex scene from Black Swan, where we hear a terrible sound-alike version of Katy Perry's I Kissed a Girl on the soundtrack, while Kendra is supernaturally morphing into the Dos Equis guy, that DiCaprio impersonator from earlier, fucking Tiger Woods, oh yeah, that joke's gonna age real well, and Ted the teddy bear from the Seth MacFarlane movie Ted.
I'm wicked hard.
Well, at least he's somewhat more relevant nowadays from that new Peacock series of his. I sure as hell can't say the same for these dated reality show star cameos from the likes of the late Big Ange and a lookalike impersonator of Honey Boo Boo.
A doll will make me holler, honey boo boo child.
God damn you, Scary Movie, for making me remember what Honey Boo Boo was. And here I thought that show's popularity was one of the few dark chapters in our country's history that we had fully put behind us. It's not hard to tell that the Weinsteins probably saw how surprisingly well A Haunted House did at the box office that January, as well as how exceedingly unpopular the found footage genre was becoming itself, and thus rejiggered this sequel's many found footage elements as much as possible with David Zucker's reshoots that supposedly make up 60% of this final cut, and are based especially off of Mama, as well as Fede Alvarez's 2013 remake of Sam Raimi's 1981 horror classic, The Evil Dead, which dropped in theaters only 1 week before Scary Movie 5, meaning that David Zucker was surely forced to work from the Evil Dead trailer as well as the original movie for these reshoots, the same shitty way that Friedberg and Seltzer would insert topical movie references into their own shitty spoof movies.
Hello, lover.
But anyway, Jody and Kendra head out in a toy car to this abandoned cabin that's now being occupied by a bunch of clean-cut Christian teens out on a religious retreat, as led by Sarah Hyland of Modern Family fame and former child rapper / Like Mike star Bow Wow, and all of whom end up possessed by deadites and forced to bloodily mutilate themselves upon these two girls in their downstairs basement, reading off these cursed words from the pages of the Necronomicon.
Gort, Klaatu, Barada.
Necktie. Nectar.
You're all going to die tonight.
You're all going to die tonight.
Only for this demonic curse to suddenly leave their bodies every time the girls then read a single word off the next page.
Addenda.
After which these confused Bible thumpers wake up in pain with their limbs cut off and faces covered in blood.
Go tell it on the mountain.
Yet what is a vaguely funny setup for a joke is then repeated to diminishing returns 2 more times in a row, with every time using the exact same shot of Bow Wow cutting off that exact same right arm of his. Also, between this movie having creepy little feral girls that are covered in filth, as well as a devoutly religious Mexican woman, just like in Lee Cronin's The Mummy, and now this subplot that is a send-up of the Evil Dead franchise, it's as if the sequel is a better pre-parody of Lee Cronin's future filmography than it is of other movies which were not even out in theaters at the time of its production. In fact, many of the scenes in this movie's trailer are either reshot or deleted entirely in the final cut, with terribly 80-yard lines of dialogue all over the place.
You really need to relax. You're just stressed out about the children.
So this probably explains why this slapdash finale of the movie has Jody and Dan suddenly realizing that the ghost of Mama, who's revealed to look like Joey Ramone if he was drowned in a tank of sewer water, is gonna throw these kids off the same cliff from which the possessed Mama had taken her own life. Unless Jody and Dan can convince these kids to come to their loving arms, just like the ending of that utterly terrifying movie directed by Andy Muschietti, The Flash! Soon enough, Mama is bitten in the neck by one of these girls, and she meets her watery grave down below inside the jaws of a shark that swims inside a hot tub inside a giant yacht that's owned by Snoop Dogg and Mac Miller, using their received reward money from finding the girls. Why am I still bothering to describe this movie with far more effort than with which it was conceived and written? Mama is dead, the kids are safe now, while Kendra nails it on stage by herself during this hip-hopified presentation of Swan Lake. Oh, this ending is such a ripoff of Satoshi Kon's Perfect Blue. So for any of you folks who'd like answers to any of the numerous questions we have just been left with, such as, why would God let this happen? Where can I get my money back? What was the point of casting Jasmine Guy from a different world as one of Fake Medea's buddies? Why did they parody that poop-eating scene from The Help in one of this movie's many dated references to Best Picture Oscar nominees?
They're going all 0 Dark 30 on our ass!
Or biggest of all, what was even the point of having Charlie Sheen and Lindsay Lohan pop up when their characters aren't mentioned again in the rest of the movie? Well, that's just too damn bad! Because the only answer that we're going to get to any of your stupid questions is revealing the identity of our secret chimpanzee narrator named Caesar. Yet another shameless ripoff of the ending to Mel Brooks's Spaceballs.
Enjoy Earth while you still got it.
Well, don't you worry, Caesar. After I finally sat through this soaking wet fart of a 5th entry, I no longer have the capacity to feel joy anymore. That is until the day I find out Harvey Weinstein's prison sentence has another 150 years added to it simply for the existence of Scary Movie 5. Damn you, Weinstein Brothers! Damn you all to hell!
Oh, shit.
Released in theaters with a toned-down PG-13 rating like the last two, but released on Blu-ray in an unrated cut that's merely a few seconds longer than the theatrical cut, Scary Movie 5, or as it was stupidly spelled on the poster, Scary Movie, was a pitiful last hurrah for one of Dimension Films' biggest franchises, before that studio would go up in flames in 2017 along with the rest of the Weinsteins' indie movie empire. With Paramount Pictures now handling the franchise's distribution rights, David Zucker yet to direct any further spoof movies as of 2026, and Malcolm D. Lee summing up his thoughts on the 5th installment with this immoral quote from a 2018 interview. "It was just a bad movie. Believe me, don't bother going to see that movie, or renting it, or anything. It's not worth your time." And I, for one, could not agree more with that assessment, because even though none of the Scary Movie sequels could quite live up to the original, at least they had Anna Faris and Regina Hall playing hilariously off of such respected names as Tim Curry, George Carlin, Bill Pullman, and of course, President Leslie Nielsen, who understood that treating stupid comedy seriously was what separated the good spoof movies from the bad spoof movies. And while neither A Haunted House or its 2014 sequel were comedic masterpieces themselves, at least those flicks deserve their cult audience for how Marlon Wayans occasionally lands a dumb, funny joke here and there. While the only thing that Scary Movie 5 deserves is to be run over with your car and immediately ignored while continuing to get a blowjob from behind the wheel. But the scariest thought of all is that if the spoof genre is indeed making a big screen comeback, then perhaps so will Jason Friedberg and Aaron Seltzer by making their lamest spoof movie to date, Simon Rex in the role of Ryan Gosling in Project Fail Harry. On the enjoyableness continuum scale from bold to Bruce, Scary Movie 5e will make you want to write a letter of apology for all the mean things you said about both Repossessed and Soul Plane, and sticks its novelty rubber knife into a 1 out of 10. Surely this was one of the worst things I ever watched for this show. Oh, I'm serious, and don't you call me Shirley. Until next time, this is Jesse Shade on behalf of Awfully Good Movies, wishing you all the happiest of Memorial Days. And I can only imagine how the late Lloyd Bridges and Leslie Nielsen would have reacted to seeing how low the spoof movie genre would sink after their deaths.
Picked the wrong week to quit sniffing glue.
Thank you for clicking on our video, everybody. If you like what you saw here, please make sure you like the video and subscribe and share with your friends who like this sort of content. JoBlo was created by movie fans for movie fans, and we appreciate your support.